Hello again. I'm in my old hometown of Skegness. Now, the last time I was here, I investigated the little-known story of the Skegness monster, and I'm back again to tell you more strange stories from this quintessential British seaside town. I'm on Lumley Road, and I'm heading towards the North Shore, where I will tell you of spooky goings-on at Skegness Pier. This is the bowling alley on Skegness Pier. I have fond memories of it when it used to be the Sands nightclub back in the 1980s, and apparently it's a very haunted building. There is a ghost that's been seen here by many people over the years. For example, a receptionist said she'd often seen something out of the corner of her eye, and she'd get a distinct feeling that someone had walked in, but when she glanced up, there was no one there. A mechanic working on the machine said he'd often felt like he was being watched, and when he looked up, he would sometimes see a large dark shadow drift away. Despite the spooky goings-on, none of the staff were frightened by the ghost. They felt it was a friendly spirit. In the late 1990s, a psychic was called in to help solve the mystery, and she claimed to have not only detected the spirit, but she even got his name. George had haunted the pier before the days of the bowling alley, when the Sands nightclub occupied the site. And she described George as aged about 50, of a stocky build, wearing a fawn-checked suit and a cap. And she got the impression he was a jolly chap who liked to bet on the horses. This is the ghost train at Botton's Pleasure Beach. It's occupied this site for many decades, and it's had a few facelifts over the years. However, there used to be another ghost train next to the haunted bowling alley, and it was situated somewhere around here. I can't find out anything about it, but it's been gone a very long time. Fortunately, I have a photo that was taken by a friend some 35 years ago. Now, the ride was said to be genuinely haunted by the ghost of the pier. Now, that's a very apt description. The ride was called Ghost Train to Hell, but it should have been called Ghost Train to Smell, because I went in there once and it stank strongly of stale urine. And I very much doubt that the ghost had anything to do with that. In addition to the phantom of the pier, the ghostly reenactment of a suicide has been seen here on the beach, in the form of a woman who walks into the sea at high tide. And there's the ghost of a mysterious man who walks this path near the pleasure beach. Now, Skegness Pier opened in June 1881, and at the time it was the fourth longest pier in England. Disaster struck in 1978, however, when northeast gales drove gigantic waves against the structure. By the time the storm had stopped, the pierhead with its 1,000-seat theatre was completely cut off from the shore. At first, there were plans to repair the pier and save the theatre, but the cost of the repairs were too great, and the structure was deemed as a hazard to shipping. By 1985, the isolated pierhead was marked for demolition, but on October the 27th of that year, an incinerator, left unattended, set light to the timbers, and the whole structure was set ablaze. Now, I was living in Skegness at the time, and I remember it very well. Once news of the pier got out, it spread like wildfire, no pun intended, and hundreds of people line the promenade to watch the spectacular nighttime blaze. A sad ending for such a historic building. As I look out to sea, I'm reminded of the legend of a ghostly bell that could be heard on foggy nights tolling beyond Skegness Pier. They are said to be the bells of Willowgripe Church, a town that once stood some 4 miles off the coast that was claimed by the encroaching sea. But the most likely explanation is they are ship's bells tolling in the fog. Now, if you'd been strolling on the beach here on a summer's day back in 1936, then you might have had a rather unnerving experience. In those days, there was a small zoo situated here on the North Shore. Now, when the lion enclosure was getting a new lick of paint, the door of the enclosure was accidentally opened and a lioness escaped. Luckily, the door was shut before the 2 remaining lions could follow suit. However, the lioness must have felt a bit peckish because she made her way to the nearby North Shore Cafe, where Mrs. Vincent, the proprietress, slammed the door shut before the lioness could get inside. She watched with disbelief as the lioness paced back and forth along the veranda at the front of the cafe, and it's extremely fortunate there were no customers sat at the tables outside. Failing to get in, the lioness got bored and headed for a stroll along the beach. Now, it was late May, so there must have been lots of people around, but there are no reports of anyone being injured. Eventually, the lioness was cornered in a narrow passage between the North Shore Cafe and the Dodgem track, where she was manoeuvred into a cage and taken back to the zoo. Now, I'm fairly sure that the narrow passage mentioned in the news reports was Prince Alfred Avenue, and you can see just how narrow it is. Just 1 year later, in 1937, there was another incident involving a lion, but this time it would end in tragedy. 62-year-old Harold Davidson, the former vicar of the tiny Norfolk village of Stiffkey, had caused a sensation when he was charged under the Clergy Discipline Act of 1892 with 6 counts of immoral conduct with London prostitutes. Davidson strenuously denied the accusation, but the evidence against him was overwhelming. The press had a field day, and they dubbed him the Prostitute Padre. 3 months after the trial, Davidson was unfrocked in a ceremony at Norwich Cathedral. From then on, he embarked on a series of bizarre publicity stunts to raise money for an appeal to clear his name. He joined a freak show on Blackpool's Golden Mile, where he would sit in a barrel protesting his innocence. The show proved to be very popular, and thousands of people paid to see the randy ex-rector of Stiffkey perform his bizarre stunts. Sometimes he sat in a refrigerated case or roasted in a glass oven with a mechanical devil prodding him in the backside with a pitchfork. One customer, recalling this event years later, said, "He was very tatty, and the place stank." He shared his seafront billing with other dubious attractions, including Mariana, the Gorilla Girl, the bearded lady from Russia, and Dick Harrow, the world's fattest man. Davidson was arrested on more than one occasion, and in 1935 he was charged with attempted suicide when he threatened to starve himself to death in a glass coffin. He was found not guilty, however, and he sued Blackpool Corporation for malicious prosecution. In the summer of 1937, Davidson appeared at Rye's Pavilion on Skegness seafront. He was billed as a modern-day Daniel in a lion's den. Armed with only a walking stick, he entered the cage with a lion called Freddy and a lioness called Toto, and he shouted to any passer-by who would listen about how badly he'd been treated by the church bigwigs. Davidson was fearful of animals and would not even enter a field if a cow was grazing, so it required a great deal of courage on his part to perform his insane act. On the fateful day of Wednesday, the 28th of July, he was giving his usual performance when Freddy, the larger of the two lions, became agitated and knocked the ex-rector to the floor. Spectators screamed in horror as the lion seized him by the neck and shook him like a rag doll. A young assistant lion tamer called Renee Summer bravely rushed into the cage, and she dragged the injured man to safety. He was taken to Skegness Cottage Hospital, and although fatally wounded, it is said that he asked for the London newspapers to be immediately informed of the incident in time to make the first editions. However, the story is unlikely to be true, as Davidson never regained consciousness. He died in Skegness Cottage Hospital on the 30th of July of a diabetic coma induced by his terrible injuries. The owner of the amusement park, Freddie Rye, told the inquest later that Freddie the lion was usually quite docile, but Davidson had accidentally stood on Toto's tail, which had angered Freddie. In an ironic footnote to the story, as the publicity-seeking ex-rector lay dying in hospital, Freddie Rye put up placards at the amusement park, which read, "See the actual lion that mauled and caused the death of the ex-rector of Stiffkey." The next day he was asked to take the notice down. Harold Davidson was buried on the 3rd of August 1937 in Stiffkey churchyard. He was a showman to the last, for it is said that an estimated 3,000 people attended his funeral. The story of the Reverend Harold Davidson is a fascinating one, and the full tale is well worth reading. There's lots about it online, and it would make a great movie in my humble opinion. Now, another strange publicity stunt that didn't end in tragedy happened here at the North Shore near the castle ruins. In September 1968, 43-year-old Emma Smith, a former nun from Nottinghamshire, was buried alive for 101 days and nights in a coffin 10 feet below the ground. Visitors paid a shilling to stand on a platform and look down a tube at Emma's face in a mirror. Everyone had to wear surgical masks to prevent germs from being passed down the tube as they spoke to her. Now, one of the most common questions that visitors asked was how she went to the toilet. Well, apparently there was a trap door at the bottom of the box fitted with a waste pipe. There was also a closed-circuit television inside the coffin so Emma could play bingo at night. She also had earphones so she could talk with a doctor every evening, and of course there were feeding tubes. Now, I'm mildly claustrophobic, and the whole idea of spending over 2 months in a box underground sounds absolutely horrific. I think I would have preferred to have taken my chances with the lions. However, after setting a new world record of being buried alive for over 101 days, Emma, unable to walk, was carried from the coffin to a nearby caravan where she was examined by a doctor, and then she wanted nothing more than a nice hot bath. Now, before I leave the North Shore, I want to show you a real house of horror. I used to live there with lots of friends back in the 1980s. Talk about sex, drugs and rock and roll, but that's a subject for a whole different video. I'm heading south past the clock tower to a lovely stretch of beach that I haven't been to for many years. Now, as I've been walking, it's only just occurred to me that I don't know how Skegness got its name. So I had a quick Google. Apparently the name Skegness is the Old Norse word for beard, and Skeggi, or the bearded one, was the Viking who established the original town. Now, I like how he was called the bearded one, because that way you don't confuse him with all the other bearded Vikings. One of the most notable changes since my time in Skegness is the creation of this offshore wind farm. I remember seeing a few turbines popping up on the horizon around 2008ish, and now there must be well over 100 of them. Now, some people think they're an eyesore, but I don't know, I'm undecided. I'm at the boating lake, and if I'm not mistaken, its slab of concrete is a World War II pillbox. I see the holes through which to fire the machine guns have been bricked up. Now, in 1940, in the dark days of the Second World War, when Britain stood alone, thousands of these fortified structures were built all over the country to repel the anticipated Nazi invasion. They were very tough. They were made of reinforced concrete. They were designed to be shell-proof and bulletproof. Now, I think the entrance to this one has been bricked up. I think I can find a way in. No. Now, this inlet, if that's the right word for it, gets flooded at high tide, and I remember someone telling me years ago that it was one of the filming locations for the 1955 Dam Busters movie. Now, I don't know if that's true, but I do know that many of the scenes for the movie were filmed at Gibraltar Point, a few miles up the coast from here. Like every seaside town, Skegness is no stranger to tragedies involving drownings. But the tragic circumstances surrounding the drowning of 11-year-old Amy Smith on the 30th of September 1911 remain a mystery to this day. Amy and her family had hired deck chairs. They were on the beach, almost directly opposite the clock tower. Amy asked her aunt if she could go paddling, and her aunt said yes, as long as she kept between the helter-skelter and the joy wheel, and to promise to come straight back to where they were sitting. She was watched paddling for a while, but then her aunt got distracted and looked away for a few moments, and when she looked again, Amy was nowhere to be seen. She was found a fortnight later, washed up just a short distance to the south of where she'd been paddling. The police said although Amy had been paddling amongst hundreds of other people, it was highly strange that no one had seen her or noticed anything unusual. Well, that was my look at the little known dark history of Skegness. There are many more strange stories from this town that I'd like to tell, but I will save them for another visit. In the meantime, thanks for joining me, take care, and I hope you'll join me again next time.